We appreciate all the patience, and although we haven't finished bringing everybody in, we have a time limit, so we're going to go ahead and get started. It is truly a great honor for me to welcome you all here today. And we are going to begin by asking a special representative, Dr. Marcia Drake, the Chief Equity Officer for the Hamilton County Department of Education, to share a few words and welcome us all here today.
Good morning, Hamilton County students, and welcome back. I hope that each of you had a very restful break and that you have returned to school today energized and ready to start the second 9 weeks of school. Yes. Awesome. And didn't you have a great opportunity to start this 9 weeks by coming to this assembly here? And I would like to welcome you to this memorable event. Today, you will have the opportunity to hear from an extraordinary survivor that didn't allow her extreme adverse circumstances to make her bitter. But today, you will learn firsthand accounts for the injustices that she experienced as a Holocaust survivor. Thank you in advance for your undivided attention. If you haven't already silenced your phones and electronic devices, please do so at this time. And also, we would like to thank our sponsor, Blue Cross Blue Shield, for hosting this event and inviting all of our students. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Drake. All right, can I get a show of hands? How many of you have heard of Treblinka? All right. Treblinka was an extermination camp that killed 800,000 people in the Holocaust. How many of you have heard of Auschwitz? Okay, getting better. Auschwitz murdered 1,100,000. How many of you have heard of Anne Frank? Okay. And how many of you have read or studied about the Holocaust? Well, that's good to see. Many hands went up. But how many of you have actually met someone that has been in the Holocaust or been through Auschwitz? We do have some. Well, this is what makes tonight's evening so important, well, today's event so important, so special. When I look around this room, I can see, and I want you all to contemplate on the potential, the bright future that you all have ahead of yourselves. Now just think, Mrs. Eva Schloss was your age, 15 years old, sharing a life not very different than yours, when all of a sudden, in just one day, it all changed. Her world was shattered beyond measure. Yet, in the night that seemed it would never end, Eva continued to believe that dawn will one day come. Having every reason for despair, she had the courage to go on hoping. After being sent to the death camps for the sole reason that Jewish blood was running through her veins, Eva continued to live and love as a Jew, being proud of who she is. Today we gather here to listen to Eva's story and to commit ourselves to carry this message of hope, survival, and love to our friends, family, and communities. To stand up for what's right, accepting ourselves and others for who we are. Each of you tonight are to become an ambassador to keep the millions of voices who have perished because of intolerance and hate, to keep those voices alive. To pass that message of hope, survival, and unity on. And we are truly privileged to have the opportunity to host Eva here in Chattanooga. But this would have not been possible without the generosity of today's sponsor. And so a special thank you to Blue Cross Blue Shield for making all this happen. And I would like to invite the Vice President of Diversity and Inclusion of Blue Cross Blue Shield, Mr. Ronald Harris, to introduce our guest of honor.
Thank you, Rabbi Pearlstein. Good morning, students, faculty, and honored guests. My name is Ronald Harris, and I serve as Vice President of Diversity and Inclusion for Blue Cross Blue Shield of Tennessee. And if you're unfamiliar with the corporate world, you might wonder what a job like mine even entails. Well, essentially, my work is about values, the things we believe are true and important. And one of the primary values held by the people and leaders at Blue Cross is that every person has worth. That means each person matters, no matter who they are, just as they are. Whether you call it diversity or inclusion or equality, it's really about respect for humanity. And we also believe that our history matters and that our stories shape us. And that's why we're honored to be part of bringing this event, Ms. Schloss, here to Chattanooga. She has a magnificent story to tell us about a dark time in our country's, in the world's history. But she also wants to help us look at how we can build a better future together. Ms. Schloss is one of the few people still alive who is a Nazi death camp survivor. She was a childhood friend of Anne Frank, whose diaries became a famous book about the Holocaust era. Ms. Schloss now travels the world to share her story and inspire peace and inspire hope. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Eva Schloss.
Good morning, everybody. Wonderful to see such a big crowd of young people learning from this terrible experience I went through. Thank you very much for coming. Well, unfortunately, this is a serious story, so I can't tell you many jokes about it because there's really nothing funny about the whole situation. In Germany, Hitler, Austrian artist, he was not a politician. He came to power because Germany had lost the First World War, and it was a very, very, very poor country. And people were desperate, and this man, Hitler, said he can start making things better for the country again. So people let him do it. So as I say, he was not experienced, he had really no idea, but he had some good ideas. So one thing was that he said, you all will have a car, the Volkswagen, the Beetle. I think you know this car because it's even manufactured here. And as well, he was the first one to build roads and motorways, autobahns, the freeways. And so there was work and things started to get better. And then he said, because we were so neglected from all the other countries, we are going to become the most powerful country in the world, and I'm going to conquer the whole of Europe. That sounds very, very ambitious, but unbelievably, he did succeed for a long time. But luckily, the free world realized that he was an evil man, and so the war started. I come from Austria, a very beautiful country, German-speaking, and one day Hitler just marched into this country and occupied that country. there were about many millions of Jews living in this country, and in Germany already in 1930s he started to persecute Jewish people. And he said, so that the population would follow him, he said it was the Jews who caused for us to lose the war, which of course was completely nonsense. But people want a scapegoat, so they accepted that. And in Austria, we had a big extended family. I had a brother, grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins. And when the Germans marched in, all our non-Jewish friends, because we had many, many Christian friends, stood in the street with big swastika flags. You might have seen those red flags. And with a Heil Hitler salute welcoming the Nazis. The Jewish people were very, very scared and realized that it wasn't safe anymore to stay in those countries. But the big problem was that the world didn't want refugees, and especially not Jewish refugees. In Europe, there were living about 7 million Jewish people. And Hitler decided that he doesn't want any Jews in the countries he's going to conquer. And the way was, how can we get rid of those people? Well, first, of course, from Germany and from Poland in the beginning, there were people who did leave. Many, many were able to come to America, to England. But by the time in 1938, when Austria and Czechoslovakia was occupied, by that time, all those free countries said, we had already enough refugees, no more refugees. So Hitler and his people realized the world doesn't want Jews. So how can we get rid of them? So all the big Nazi leaders got together in Berlin at a very, very beautiful lake. And they were having a big, big meeting to decide how can we get rid of all those millions of Jewish people. And they came up with a horrible, horrible decision. The only way to get rid of him is to gas them. Because before in Poland they had started to shoot people. But you know, that cost one soldier, one bullet, so they said that's too expensive. So the way to get rid of them was to build gas chambers and put hundreds of people in, and it will only take 15 minutes to kill those people. And this is what they started to build, and this is what's the plan. Can you imagine? And the terrible thing was that the world knew what was going on, but nobody seems to care. So we were lucky to get out from Austria and settled down in Amsterdam in Holland, which was a very lovely country. Holland was always taking in refugees from a different country at the time as well. When in the Huguenots, it was a revolution with Protestant and Catholic. They took many people in. They took many people when the Jews were persecuted in Spain. So it was a very open, free community. And many Jews had settled there. I say many, of course, not enough. And we lived in a nice apartment. And you know, in an apartment you have no yards for children to play. And so all the children came out in the streets. There was a big open square. And one day, I was 11 years old at the time. One day a little girl came to me and said her name was Anne Frank. I've seen, you have heard of her name. She has become the symbol of the 1.5 million Jewish children who were murdered. But at that time we were both 11 and we gossiped, we played together. I was quite shy because I had experienced already anti-Semitism in Austria. And, but Anne, her family had left when she was 4 years old. She was a real Dutch girl. She only spoke Dutch. And she had made many friends. She went to a local school. I had to learn a new language. which was very, very difficult. You know, now you have children in England now, I go speaking schools, and the teacher says, you know, we have children here from 20 different countries. But there is now, people are used to this, the children get special English lessons, they get help, but at that time there were not many refugees. And so people just said, well, they just have to try to manage. But it is difficult. They put me at the end of the class and I just had to follow lessons, so I lost all my confidence, and it was really, really very, very difficult. My brother, who was very talented, he had a very good ear, he picked up the language much quicker than me, but I really had to struggle. And Anne, so she was only 11 and 12 years old, she was already quite a big flirt, she wanted already boyfriends, and when I told her I had an older brother, she said, when can I come and meet him? But he wasn't really interested in a girl who was same age as his little sister. So, and we thought we'll settle down nicely in Amsterdam, but it was not to happen. Because after 3 months that we were there, Hitler's army marched into Holland as well. And by that time, by 1940, they had really a very, very powerful army. And Holland hadn't really, you know, a little country, really couldn't fight them. So within 5 days they gave up, and the Germans just occupied that country. And we Jewish people became really very scared. What was going to happen to us now? Nothing really happened. They didn't want to make enemies with the Dutch population, so life carried on. But slowly, slowly they started to take measures against the Jewish population. We were not allowed to go on public transport. Well, we all had bicycles. Then we had to hand in our bicycles. We were not to go on trams or trains. We were not allowed to go to cinemas or sport events, not to swimming pools. We had to be in at 8 o'clock. We only were able to shop in Jewish shops. So things became difficult, but not life-threatening. But then, after 2 years occupation, 10,000 young people, some of you might be 16 here, those would have, and Jewish, might have been called up to be deported to Germany to work in German factories. Well, the Jewish people didn't trust that. They killed Jews in Germany. Why should they invite them back to Germany? And so my father said to my brother, he got his call-up notice, and Anne's older sister, Margot, they were just 16. And my father called us together, and he said, we are going to go into hiding. So I said, what do you mean, hiding? And my father said, I found some wonderful Dutch non-Jewish people who will open their homes to keep us safe. But he said, you know, the apartments are quite small. I couldn't find a family who would take in 4 people. So I'm afraid we have to split up. I will go with my mother and he will go with my brother. And I started to cry. I didn't want to be separated. And my father explained to me, if we are in 2 different places, the chance that 2 of us will survive is bigger. And he mentioned survive. And that was really the first time that I really became scared. Meaning, you know, it means I might die. And with 13, this is actually quite scary. But this is what happened. We split up. I went with my mother to one apartment, my father and brother to a different one. And that was, some of you have read the diary. That is what happened to the Frank family and many, many other Jewish families. And the Frank family were in Otto's office. And it was quite big there at the back of the office. And there were 4 other people. So they were with 8 people in hiding. With us, it was different. My mother and me were the only people there, and we had to sit still the whole day. Can you imagine? Day in, day out, in case neighbors would hear that there are voices when the people who own the flat are at work. So we sat there, like I sit there. We had the lunch next to us. We had even a potty so that we wouldn't go to the toilet. And I was a very sporty child. I had many friends outside. And I didn't know what to do. Can you imagine the whole day from morning to evening to just sit still? So I became very, very miserable, very depressed. My mother tried to teach me because in case the war wouldn't last very long, I wouldn't want to get behind in my schoolwork. But you know, my mother wasn't a teacher. I was a bad pupil at the time. I didn't remember the things. My mother got impatient with me. I started to cry, so that didn't work. So I started to knit a little bit, I read a little bit, but day in, day out, to do the same thing, you know, this was very, very bad. And so we were in hiding for 2 years, but the Nazis really wanted to catch every Jew. And so they made house searches. So they came to knock on the door and search the homes. So in every place where we were, we had a hiding place within the hiding place. A false partition, sometimes a very little space under floorboards. And so when the knock came, we quickly had to go. After 2 years living in fear, we were betrayed by a Dutch nurse who pretended she worked for the resistance, for the good cause, but really they helped the Nazis. And we were immediately taken to a holding camp, and within a few days we were taken already on transport eastward. You have heard there were many death camps and as well some work camps, but mainly death camps. Over 300 camps in Germany and Poland where Jewish people were murdered. So you can imagine, when we were put on a train, they never told us where we were going, how scared we were. The train was not an ordinary passenger train. It was like a goods train, like a container really, metal, wooden floors, nothing was in it. There was just a little slit of air, and people had to stand most of the journey. It was May, the trains were metal, so it got very, very, very hot. But it was the last time that we were together as a family. My father apologized. He can't do anything anymore now. He said, you'll be on your own now. He gave us all kind of advice how to behave, always help each other, never give up, try to keep the courage, and hopefully the war won't last. That was 1944. The war had been going on already 4 years. America was already in the war, and the hope was that perhaps the war will end soon and we will still be alive. So after a horrible, horrible journey, there was just, we had 2 buckets, one to use for toilets, one for clean water. Once a day, the doors were slit open and big chunks of bread was thrown in, which was of course not enough for 80 people. So can you imagine 3-4 days without food, practically without water, people fainted, and eventually the train stopped for good, and we heard shouting and a lot of dogs barking. And the doors were slit open, and we heard a lot of German shouting, and there was a lot of commotion. And we were told to jump down, and we realized we were in Auschwitz. And we knew this was the biggest killing camp. We knew there were gas chambers. So you can imagine how scared we were. I had just turned 15. My brother was just 17. My mother 40. My father 45. But really in the middle of their life. The next thing was men and women to different sites. The area was enormous. And there were many different camps. The men and women were different camps. So the men started to walk to a different part of the camp, and we were in the part where the women camp was. Can you imagine to say goodbye to your dad, to your brother, assuming perhaps you will never ever see them? So everybody started to cry and holding on to each other, and we were torn apart, and the men walked away. And then we had to stand. It was long queues, but always 5 in the front. And then the famous, well-known, infamous Dr. Mengele. He was a proper camp doctor. He was perhaps 35 years old, and he wasn't there to help people when they get ill, but to decide who was going to live and who was going to die. So meaning there was a selection taking place. So we had to stand in 5 people in one first row, and that went big queue, only women, kids, and he looked you over just for a fraction of a second. And like a conductor with a little baton, he directed you this side or this side. I was just 15, I wasn't particularly tall, but somehow, I don't know, my mother gave me, she had a hat and coat, and she gave me that. And I didn't really want to wear it. It was hot, and the hat was quite a big hat, but this really saved my life at that time, because the hat had a big rim, and when this Mengele looked at me, he didn't really see how young I was. We lost about half our Dutch transport of the women, all the children, even girls of 16, 17, if they were small or perhaps very pale from the journey, were taken to the other side. So we were not asked what age. People, even 45, if they had a bad journey, were taken to the other side. But luckily, my mother and me were not selected at this first selection. Then we were herded into a barrack, and big area. The next command, undressed completely naked. And the Nazis, young SS boys, were walking around laughing at our embarrassment. Then we were tattooed. We all got a number on our arm, and we were told, forget you have a name. If we ever need you, you were going to be called out by the number. Then all our hair was shaved, not with a proper razor, but with big scissors. Very rough. Many people started to bleed from their head. And while this was going on, they told us with much pleasure, laughing, that the family you had been separated from were gassed. Within 50 minutes, they were already dead. And if you go outside, you will smell the burning of flesh because they're already being burned. Can you imagine how a mother felt when she had been separated from her child? So people started to cry again, and you can imagine the atmosphere. And then we were taken out, still naked, in front of a huge mountain of clothes, and we were thrown one garment. That could be a night dress, it could be a winter coat. That was all we got. The next heap were shoes. We were shown 2 shoes, of course never a pair, sometimes 2 right shoes, sometimes 2 left shoes. And then we were herded always quick, run, into our barracks. Those were huge flat buildings, no stories, and both sides were bunks, 3 high, like cages, very low, and we had to crawl in there just on boards with nothing, no straw, no blanket, no pillow, nothing. And they told us, this is where you were going to sleep as long as you were alive. In the morning we were called out. We had to stand quiet for 2 hours till the camp was counted. We got a little mug of liquid. Then we were taken to work from morning to evening without a lunch break, without a toilet break even. In the evening we were herded back like cows are taken to the field, you know. And again, we had to stand for 2 hours. Then we got our supper, which was a chunk of bread. Then it might have been 9, 10 o'clock. We dropped on our bunk and tried to sleep. But we were plagued by lice and bed bugs. So everybody was scratching all the time. Our skins became full of boils. We got infected. And very often in the morning you woke up and the person next to you had died. So you can imagine every day you were alive was really a miracle. Some of the time I was together with my mother, but after about, every day was the same. There was no Sunday, no Saturday, nothing. We didn't know what month it was. We only knew the seasons. It became cold. There were selections, and that was the most terrible things what happened for me. My mother was selected to be killed. But through a miracle she was saved, and we were reunited again. In the meantime, it was winter, and the Russians were approaching. The Germans fled and left the camp, but took mainly all the people with them because they didn't want us to fall in the hand of the Russians and stay alive. So there were very, very few people left in the camp. And again, by luck, my mother and me stayed there. And one day we woke up and the camp was very, very empty. And the Germans had fled, taking most of the inmates with them in the night. But we, again, you know, it is controversial that we would think to stay in Auschwitz saved our life. But this is what happened. And within a few days, the Russians came and looked after us. But the war was, of course, not finished. So, and there was fierce fighting in Poland. And so the Russians took us away from Auschwitz, but we couldn't get home yet to Amsterdam, so we went eastward. And we traveled till May eastward with the Russians till the end of the war. And when that happened, of course, we realized we had survived. My mother, me, and Otto Frank were amongst those people. We had no idea what has happened with my brother and my father. Otto Frank had no idea what had happened with his wife and his daughters. Eventually, we were taken on a big ship to France, a journey through the Mediterranean. Have a look on the map, this huge journey we did. And eventually we came back to Amsterdam. And there we waited for news of our family. Well, when that came, it was the most terrible news we could expect. We got a letter from the Red Cross telling us that my father and brother had perished in an Austrian death camp called Mauthausen, several days because the American army had come to liberate that camp. That was for me the last straw. I turned 16. You know, I had survived because I'd never given up hope that life would eventually get back to normal. But when I realized it will never ever happen, I became very, very depressed. And I wanted to tell people about the terrible things we had experienced, what we had seen, but people didn't really want to know. They said, we have all suffered, let's just move on. And so I had to suppress it, and for 40 years I didn't speak about my experience. Otto Frank came as well to tell us that his whole family had perished. And then after a few days, after he told, some who had read the diaries, there were 4 people who looked after the family, and one of them, Miep Gies, had found the diary, and she gave it to Otto. And that was the only thing which Otto had from Anne. And it was very, very important. And of course he published it, and only when it was published in America in 1952 did it become a bestseller. And then it went from strength to strength. There was a play being made, a film being made. It was translated into 70 languages. And wherever I go in the world, people know about Anne. Not necessarily have read the diary, but they know that she is really the symbol of the 1.5 million children who were murdered by the Nazis. And I was quiet for 40 years, but then I realized the world hadn't really learned. There were still no wars, there was still discrimination. People still didn't accept each other for who they were, and I realized I have to really speak up. And that is what really most survivors did. Many started to write books about their experience. And, but you know, now there are very few people about who still can tell their story. As I say, I was 15, but most of the survivors were, of course, a bit older, more between 20 and 30 years. And I'll be 90 next year, so those people would be now end of 90 and even 100. And there are very few people now who tell the stories. So I feel it's my duty to inform you so that you can learn from this terrible event and try to change the world. You will have a voice when you grow up. Take an interest. The Germans, not all, of course, agreed with Hitler, but people were cowardly, they were bystanders. And that is what we shouldn't be. If we see something is going wrong, we should have the courage to speak up. And if we all speak up, the world will change. And we will really get a safer and better world for everybody to be able to get a good education, to get a job, to get housing, and be able to bring up their families in harmony and peace. So this is a message for you. We'll have a few minutes for questions, and you've been a wonderful audience. You've really listened, and I hope you will tell the message which I gave you, and tell your parents and your siblings that you have spoken, heard as a survivor, tell you that the world has to change. Thank you very much for a great audience.
Thank you, Eva Schloss. Everybody, give it up for Eva one more time.
Thank you.
Okay, children, does anyone, actually first, we actually have kids that are at Baylor that have been watching this, watching Eva's talk. And I believe we are going to be able to take some questions from those kids, doing a two-way stream here, I believe. All right, in the meantime, while they're working on that part, does anybody here have a question for Eva?
Here's somebody.
Yes.
Yes.
Sorry? I am not asking you this just for the record. She asked how old you were.
89. So next year I'll be 90. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? I'm going to need hands raised if you have a question. Gotcha. I see you over there.
Do you still talk to people that do you have friends from the camp?
She asked if you still have friends that you keep in touch with from the camp or from that time.
Well, you know, I live now in London, England, so the people who I did know in Amsterdam who returned, no, I have nobody really anymore. There are some survivors, of course, in England, and I do know them, but I must say, I don't really go there for even a club. I don't go to that because I'm too busy telling my message.
Thank you. I believe we have the Baylor student.
My question was, did you ever forgive Germany in general for what happened? And if so, why did you forgive them?
Very good question. For many, many, many years, of course, I hated everybody in Germany and even the language. So it's my mother tongue. Even when I heard German, I felt really bad about that. But after about 30 years, there's a new generation of German young people who are very, very sorry what has happened, and they had nothing really to do. I met many young German people who said, I feel very guilty about what has happened. And I said, well, you were not even alive. So I realized we can't be prejudiced to people who had nothing to do with it. And the Germans are really the only country in the world who have admitted their guilt. Angela Merkel, the prime minister there, has taken 1.5 million refugees into the country as a guilt feeling to show that they are compassionate. And luckily the Nazis, those people who were at the time doing those terrible things, there's nobody alive anymore. And those people have never forgiven. Those were evil. But the population were just cowardly and, bystanders. So I go to Germany. I have many friends there now. When I come back in November, I go to Berlin. I will talk there to kids. They are very, very interested in Germany. Every child has to go to a concentration camp to see what their grandparents, great-grandparents have done.
Hello. How did you find your own personal peace after all that had happened?
Well, a good question too. It took me a long, long time, but you see on the news always bad news. But I must say I've met some wonderful, wonderful people in America, in Germany, in Japan, in China, in Australia. They are wonderful people, and the young people, I've met many, many. They all really want to work for peace. I've got 5 grandchildren. They all help for Christmas. They help in soup kitchen to give the homeless people a Christmas celebration as well. They're all concerned about the world. And I'm sure amongst you there'll be some wonderful people who help people who need help. And so, I realize, yes, it was a horrible time. There's still terrible, many people are suffering, but there are as well some very wonderful people who try to make the world a better place. So, you have to accept that. And basically, I'm an optimist. I hope I might not experience that, but the world will realize, as well with climate change and everything, that we have to look after our planet and not destroy it.
Thank you.
What was going through your mind when you stepped into the concentration camp?
Well, I really thought this will be the end of my life. And you can imagine, it was really, really, really terrible. With 15, I had a very nice life, and I wanted to have a nice life again. And it was really awful, awful.
How many Jews do you know that are currently alive?
How many survivors are still alive?
No, she was asking just how many Jews that you know currently that are, your friends, your acquaintances, I would imagine quite a bit?
No, unfortunately, every week there's a funeral of somebody who I had known. As I said, they're usually in the high 90s and even 100s. I mean, people live now a long time, which is amazing, really. But I lose everyday people. I lost my husband. We were married 62 years. I lost him 2 years ago. He was 91. And as I say, many friends who die in the 90s.
Thank you.
Recently, there have been many people, people that worked in Nazi camps that are 100 years old right now, that have been arrested. Do you think they should be pardoned, or do you think they should be in jail?
I think they should be jailed. Because, as I say, those people who worked in the Nazi camps, those Nazis, were really evil people. They think, all right, they had to do the job perhaps, but they did extra cruel things, They didn't have to beat us. For instance, they ate in front of us, showing us lovely meat or drinking milk. There were lots of things our body really craved. And then they offered you something, and when you grabbed it, they threw it away. Things which were not necessary. Those were really evil people.
Thank you. So real quick, if you are with Sail Creek or Ivy Academy, I believe you all have a little bit further of a trip to make. So you will, if you can just quietly go ahead and exit out to your buses. Just Sail Creek and Ivy Academy. Again, quietly, please. While they're leaving, we're going to go with one more question here.
When you were leaving the camp, just thinking about returning home after being gone for so long, how did you feel about that?
Well, we were all very anxious to get home as quickly as possible, hoping we would find the rest of our families there. But when it wasn't, this was really, we were, I was more, it sounds peculiar, I was more miserable after the war when I was just living with my mother than I was in the camp. Because in the camp I used all my energy and all my willpower and all my optimism to stay alive. But when I realized we would never ever be a family again, I became very, very depressed.
Thank you.
Did you have any specific coping skills to help you stay alive?
No, we didn't have to do professional work. It was hard labor, and I was born in May, a Taurus, so I was a very stubborn child, still stubborn. My family says, "Oh, Mom knows everything better," but and I think that helped me through as well.
Thank you.
At the camp, were there any Germans that had even just the slightest change of heart and tried to help you in even just the smallest way?
Well, I have heard stories about that, but I must say I've never experienced any help from anybody. And all our group, no, never.
Did you understand what was going on when the war started?
Not when the war started. Our parents tried to protect us. There was no television, of course, and there was a radio we did have, but my parents and most parents didn't listen to the news in front of us children. Parents tried to really protect the children so that we wouldn't be scared.
When did your mother decide to marry Otto Frank?
Oh, interesting question. When I finished school, I didn't really know what to do with my life. And Otto Frank, who had become a good house friend, helped me he said I should become a photographer, and he knew somebody in London who had a photographic studio. And I went to London for a year. And I think in this time, when Otto and my mother were by themselves, I think they spent a lot of time together, and they realized that they loved each other and would like to get married. And so that was in 1953. So really 8 years after we had come back from Auschwitz.
Great question.
If you could have changed one thing about World War II that could have made anything a little better, what would you do?
Well, everybody hoped that America would come earlier into the war. Churchill went to America many, many times and had meetings with President Roosevelt and tried to persuade him to come into the war. But of course, America didn't want to get involved. Only they were involved, of course, when they were attacked by Japan. And that really helped Europe a lot, that America was fighting then as well in the war. But they had, of course, to fight more in the Far East. Only in 1944 did they really come and help Europe out of the war.
Thank you. She'll keep answering questions, guys, but please be respectful and stay quiet. Okay?
You have very good questions. Thank you for that.
What's the highest grade of education that you've gotten?
Well, I finished high school, and then I worked already in Amsterdam a little bit as a photographer, and I met a man from the university in art, and he invited me to come and study history of art because I was interested in that. But I did this for 6 months, but I was restless. I couldn't sit still and follow lectures, and so that is when I decided then I would go to England to become a photographer in a studio.
Thank you.
When did you start speaking to the public?
What was that?
When did you start speaking to the public about your experiences?
In 1986, so after 40 years.
1986?
It's quite an interesting story. I'll try to tell you very quickly. In London, I lived in London, and in Amsterdam, where the Frank family had been hiding, it became a museum. And people there decided they would make a traveling exhibition about Anne's life and about the war and things like that, so that more people can hear about it. And it came to London in 1986, so quite late, 40 years after the war. And of course I was invited, and I went as a guest, and the organizer asked me to come and sit at the front on the stage, and in the end he said, I want to tell them something about my experience. Well, I was very shy, I had never spoken, and I had no idea what I was going to say. But I was a big crowd looking at me expectantly, and suddenly everything that I had suppressed for 40 years came flooding out. And it was for me really a very important event, because till then I had nightmares about it. I had it always, I didn't speak to my family about it, not even to my husband. And suddenly I could sort of open up to it. And that was very important. And then people said, you have such an interesting story, you should really write a book. And that is Eva's story. It is available on Amazon. See if you can get it. It's of course much more than I could tell you here. And it's a very interesting book to see more details about what has happened. And since then I haven't stopped speaking.
How close were you to Anne Frank?
How what?
How close were you to Anna Frank?
Well, not very close, you know. Imagine when you were 11 years old, you only had little friends. You know, we played in the street. I went up to her apartment. She came to us. But she was quite different. I was a sporty child, loved all the sport, did tricks on the bicycle with the boys, played rounders, which is a bit like your baseball. And she was a real girl, more interested in her clothes, in her hairstyles, and in boyfriends already. And I was not interested in boys, you know. I had a brother, boys came in the house, there was no mystery about them.
Thank you.
Eva, a few more? How many more do you want to do?
Well, I don't mind, as long as I don't mind.
A few more?
All right, we're going to keep going with questions.
You're very good. I'm very happy about you.
Y'all are out of school. It's fine. You're here. It's better than there, right? All right. Just kidding. Sorry about that. Let's. All right, next question.
Were you ever praying in the Holocaust?
Did you pray while you were in the camp?
Yes, definitely. That was the only thing we could do, to pray to God to stop those terrible, terrible atrocities. But unfortunately, God wasn't there for us at the time. He probably had his reason, but I don't know. We don't know about that.
Thank you.
If all the people in the Holocaust were still alive, do you think the message about equality would be stronger?
If what? Say
He
again.
said if everybody in the Holocaust had survived, would the message of equality be stronger if everyone was alive?
Well, that's a question which we would never know. But, well, it couldn't be because, the plan was to kill those people. And they were very, very clever in doing that. So, I don't know the answers to that.
Thank you.
If you had any location to go after the war that would bring you peace, which location would you live?
Well, now, after the war, I didn't want to live in Amsterdam. But now when I go and visit Amsterdam, I said, why didn't I want to stay there? It's a lovely country, it's lovely people. And, I love London, beautiful city, and I'm quite happy there. But when you get older, it's a big, big city. It's difficult for older people to get around. So a smaller city might have been better. But, we chose London, and my family lives there, so I'm never going to move from there anymore. Interesting question.
Okay, we've got a group that's going to ask one question for you, Eva.
Yeah.
Many of us realize that very few people alive can even come close to the life that you live. But seeing as though we've got an auditorium full of young people here, we would like to know, what is it that you can give us for advice for our own problems, our own tribulations, things that happen in our life, and how we can surpass things relative to our lives?
Well, I did really tell you already about it. It's, we are all, now the world is mixed. We have Jews, we have Christians, we have Muslims, we have Buddhists arming, we have people from China, from Africa, and there is unfortunately prejudice amongst people. And this is really completely unnecessary. We are all created by God. We are all equal people, and we should be treated like everybody should be treated the same. And this is really the most important thing, that we are a big, big family of the human race, and we shouldn't go against each other. And wars as well. People who fight in the war come back very, very damaged. And this is, they can't go back. I've met many veterans who've been fighting in Afghanistan or in Iraq, and the people expect them to go back to their families as if nothing had happened. Those people have seen horrible, horrible things. They can't act as if nothing has happened. And, people get ill from it, and wars is the most unnecessary, the most evil thing, and especially now with our very, very terrible weapons, with drones. Somebody can sit here and press a button, and people 10,000 miles away in a village will be killed. So you have no connection. You don't even know who is going to be killed. That is terrible. So stop manufacturing those terrible weapons. We don't want to use them. Stop to make atomic weapons. If we use them, our world is going to be destroyed. And we don't want that. We've been given a beautiful planet. Let's value that and let have everybody a happy and satisfactory life. This is a message for everybody.
Thank you. All right, we have time for 2 more questions. And there is a lot more people than 2 right here. If you all want, we're going to take one question first, and then if you all want to kind of discuss and come up with one question that you would all like to ask her, present your question to the group, Yep, you with two hands. Present you'll all talk about it, and then one of you come up and ask the question. Do you all have a
While you're thinking about this,
Okay, if you were in bus 437
go home,
East,
go to your school,
Ottawa,
tell your
please make your way
friends
out
what
to the
you've
lobby
heard,
quietly.
Tell your siblings what you have
Okay, one more question. One more question. Oh, sorry. Eva, I apologize. I didn't hear you
It's
speak.
all right. Spread
All right.
the message between your friends who have not been able to come here, and as well at home with your family in the evening. Discuss it, debate about it, and learn from it.
Okay.
How many people that you met survived?
How many survivors do you know? How many people have you met that survived is what he's asking.
Oh, I've met, you know, in every town where I speak, there are people coming forward and said they have survived, or I meet children of survivors. And very often they say, I wish my mother or my father, who were survivors, would have talked to me. I don't really know about their history. And this is really very, very sad, because many people just didn't have the courage to speak about it, and those stories will be lost forever.
Thank you. Eva, that's it for the questions, but I wanted to check and see if there's any final thoughts that you would like to share with this group.
Well, I think I've given them already many final thoughts. So I think you have been a very attentive, wonderful audience. Thank you very much. Thank you, thank you. Thank you. Great. Bye. Thank you. Bye-bye. 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 I greet you with shalom, which means peace in Hebrew. Shalom to everybody.